guns, sex, cocaine, call girls, Sonny Chiba.
Well, he ain't so much a good guy as he's just a bad motherfucker.
Sicilians, Gary Oldman, love. How the f did Quentin Tarantino write True Romance? While Quentin Tarantino is now considered one of the best writers and directors in Hollywood history, back in the early 1990s, he was writing different screenplays trying to get something on the screen. In 1993, True Romance comes out, written by Quentin Tarantino, directed by Tony Scott. This is Tarantino's first movie to make it to the big screen. So how did Tarantino write a script like this? How did he mix crime with a romantic comedy? The first and most important part of a story is the setting. With the influence of mob culture in this story, Tarantino was subjected to just a few different cities. You can't have a mob-influenced script and have the setting be Idaho. Goodfellas that took place in Brooklyn. Lawrence Block would often base his books in Buffalo or someplace in New York. Then after you set up the setting, you have to fill it with characters. Immediately we're introduced to Clarence as he sits at a bar talking to a woman there about Elvis, just going on and on about Elvis.
I'm fucking Elvis.
We're introduced to the character. It's easy to think that this character, Clarence Worley, is based off Tarantino himself. Like Clarence, Tarantino is a big pop culture buff. He views off tangents about movies and music, and we're introduced to this sort of rambling on, obsessed mindset that Clarence has with pop culture, whether it's Elvis, whether it's Kung Fu movies. Clarence is going to the movies that night on his birthday to see
Kung Fu movies.
He asked this gal to go with him. She says no. We're kind of introduced to how Clarence is a loner, and that sets up for the rest of the story. So obviously Tarantino worked in the video store. Clarence, we find out, works in a comic book store. Very similar, just kind of working a minimum wage job, very satisfied with his life, how it is, young guy, not really pursuing anything big until an opportunity comes around that he ends up taking advantage of, and that's his call to adventure. So Act 1, basically the setup for the movie, basically the setup for the rest of the movie, I should say. We are being introduced to characters. We are being set up for the events that are going to come. So first act is Clarence meeting Alabama. Alabama is a call girl who was hired by one of Clarence's co-workers to meet with Clarence on his birthday, show him a good time, basically. They go to movies, they go eat dessert, go back to Clarence's place, and they end up falling in love, and they end up getting married. A couple of writers I really admire, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the creators and writers of South Park. One thing that they talk about is not setting up scenes and then saying, and then this happens, but instead saying, so this scene happens, but this scene happens, and therefore this scene happens. So replacing and thens with buts and therefores. So in this instance, what you can see as far as the direction the movie is headed is Clarence ends up marrying Alabama, and that's great, and you have sort of a romantic comedy element going there, but Alabama also has a pimp, and to think a pimp is just gonna let his girl leave is, you're talking nonsense. You can think of the next coming scenes as a lot of buts and therefore. So Clarence and Alabama get married, but Alabama has a pimp. Therefore, Clarence has to try to get Alabama out of that situation. Alabama wants to just ignore it and hope that it goes away by itself, but Clarence, with his love for Alabama, wants to get her out, wants them to leave and live a happy life together without any sort of worry. So Clarence ends up going to Alabama's pimp's house. Drexel is the pimp who Alabama technically works for. So Clarence goes to meet Drexel. This is what Robert McKee refers to as the inciting incident. So Clarence wants to get all her stuff and get her out of Drexel's control. He goes there, confronts Drexel. They end up getting into a gunfight. Clarence ends up shooting the majority of the people that are in there, and he grabs a suitcase without looking at what was in there. He has somebody get a suitcase ready for him, and he just takes whatever they give him. He gets out of there in a frantic hurry. He goes back to meet Alabama, says, "Here, I have your things," and then they open up and it's a briefcase of cocaine.
These aren't my clothes.
So he and Alabama are forced to think, what can they do in this situation? Meanwhile, with the death of Drexel, so here's another therefore. Clarence killed Drexel, therefore whoever Drexel sells the cocaine for and runs the girls for is now involved in the story. The family is the Cacati family. It's all run by Blue Lou Boyle. There's a hierarchy. So you got Drexel, and then you have Vincent Cacati. Step above him would be Blue Lou Boyle. Obviously, with the murder of Drexel, then that next step up is gonna find out who did this, who stole the cocaine, who fled. And funny enough, when Clarence goes over to Drexel's, he gets his driver's license, and then Clarence forgets it when he leaves. Obviously, you get somebody's driver's license, it's pretty easy to trace where they live, who their family is, the whole 9 yards. So Clarence and Alabama go to visit Clarence's dad, just as sort of a setup scene for where they're gonna go, who they're gonna meet. They're gonna go to LA, meet Dick Ritchie. This is all obviously the beginning of Act 2. So now we brought the father into the story, and now he's a character that is going to play a role. So Clarence and Alabama go to visit him. They tell him where they're going. They have the cocaine, and they're heading to LA to meet Dick Ritchie. So the next scene is the Sicilian scene. This is when Dennis Hopper is confronted by Vincent Cacati.
You know who I am, Mr. Woolley?
I give up. Who are you?
The Antichrist. You got me in a vendetta kind of mood.
Who is trying to find where Clarence is at so he can get his cocaine back. So he talks to his dad a little bit. He's got his whole gang around him. He's a Sicilian. He's very proud of that. This is where Clarence's dad has a choice. So he can either tell this guy where Clarence is at, obviously giving away his son. So he is faced with the choice of either giving away that information or, being tortured and dying. He chooses the latter.
What? Eggplant.
And this is such a great scene because he irks Christopher Walken's character so much.
You're a cantaloupe.
That he ends up killing Clarence's dad himself.
I'll kill anybody. It's 1984.
Tarantino has even talked about that scene, saying that, it was this scene so good that it almost didn't fit the movie. Like, it was so above everything else that happened in the movie that it almost didn't fit. I wouldn't say I necessarily agree with that. I think it fits within the movie. I don't think it overshadows everything. I think it is the most memorable part of the movie. I would highly recommend checking that out. There's videos of that on YouTube. The Sicilian scene from True Romance. And of course, that whole hierarchy, we don't see the whole thing. So Tarantino is great at what he does because he writes off the page. So he'll, and what I mean by that is he'll just write the background of all those guys. So he'll write the background of Vince Cacati. He'll write the background of Blue Boyle, who we don't even meet in the movie. But he'll write the background on them just because, we can kind of get these sort of little ticks. So Vincent is Sicilian. Sicilians are great liars, he says. He knows all the different pantomimes. Guy has 17, woman has 20, or whatever it is. You get little instances where you can see the background of the character, even though the movie isn't necessarily shoving it in your face. So you can tell that these are well fleshed out. Tarantino says he loves to start with dialogue because that allows him to see the characters in a different sort of light. He gets to see their background, what their interests are. That's why you see, throughout all of his movies, there's background filler conversations. Take the beginning scene of Pulp Fiction.
And what do they call it?
They call it Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
That's right.
So John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson's characters, were talking about how John Travolta's character was in Amsterdam for the last 2 years. They're just talking about little differences. Big Mac being called Le Big Mac, Vincent not going to a Burger King while he was over there. Just like these small little things that allow you to uncover the character. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tarantino did that with Blue Lou Boyle, did it with Vincent Cacati, did it with Dennis Hopper's character. When you are writing your own screenplay, writing your own book, writing your own novel, whatever it is, explore the characters, get deep into dialogue, get a long first draft so that you have things to cut, but that you also know the characters. There's gonna be things that aren't gonna make it to the movie, aren't gonna make it to the book. Tarantino talks about this the whole time. He'll write so much and a lot of it won't make it into the movie, but that still makes the character. Still allows us to see some sort of background that he was able to explore while he was writing these characters. And one thing about stories is that they have to be authentic. So we're introduced to Clarence. He is sort of a loser in a comic book store, and he is very interested in adventure, very passionate about comic books, passionate about movies. Could just tell that there's something that he is hoping for outside of the life that he's living right there. So when he marries Alabama, it's sort of like this awakening. So he wants to do the best for her. So when he goes to Drexel's place, I see it as extremely realistic because he is acting out of love. And I think that's what Tarantino was thinking about when he was actually writing it as well. Not that that's actually going to happen in real life, but talk about just romantic movies in general. This is a romantic movie. It's a romance. True romance. Obviously, there's a lot of crime and gore that's plugged in there with drugs and all the other stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a romance. It's a mix of genres. When you're writing in genres, you are writing towards some sort of organized end. When you pick a genre, you are going to be exploring that specifically. There are different elements to every genre. So when Tarantino was writing the screenplay, he was taking in the different aspects of a romance as well as different aspects from a crime movie as well. And when he mixed together, he obviously had a sort of a crime romance. But when you're writing within a genre, you're taking the elements that you see from that genre in particular, and you're adding your own spin to them. You're plugging in your characters, your situations, but you're still staying true to that genre. When Clarence marries Alabama, that is an element of that genre where love forces a man to do crazy things. So it makes it realistic in that aspect. My favorite parts of stories are the beginning, when we get to meet all the characters, and the end. One of the writer's most difficult jobs when they are writing either a novel, book, screenplay, whatever it is to not let the middle sag. Letting the middle sag is when you get done introducing the characters, you have the act one climax, so you're getting the audience involved in the movie, and then the act one climax comes, but then you let the subsequent scenes fall short of that act one climax. The writer's job is to make sure that the audience stays focused on the movie the entire time, because they're gonna have a more enjoyable experience. It's so easy to see, like we were watching a movie at home, it sort of loses your attention after a little bit, and now we just have our phones that we can go to. So, next time you're watching a movie, discover at what point in that movie did I pick up my phone, and how can I as a writer avoid that when I'm reaching my audience. It's the same thing for a book. There's some books like, I'll read a Michael Connelly book and I'll finish that in 2 days. And there's other books where, the writer loses me and it takes me, 2 to 3 weeks to finish. There are different tactics to keeping your audience engaged, and that is what your job as a writer is going to be, is to make sure that they're engaged the entire time. Having different subplots in the second act that keep the audience engaged is vitally important. So in True Romance, the subplots, one of them is Dick's acting career. So Dick Ritchie is Clarence's best friend. Dick lives in LA. He is trying to become an actor. He lives in a shithole apartment with a pothead roommate.
Hi, I'm Emma.
Clarence, you look good. Let's go. Let's get some. Yeah, I'm not dressed. Who's this? Boy. All right, let's go.
He's one of the subplots, since he's a new character that's being introduced. That's one subplot. The second one would be Clarence and Alabama have the cocaine. Now a subplot is, who are they gonna find as a buyer? So Clarence goes off to LA because he figures Dick Ritchie is in the acting business and there's a bunch of Hollywood hotshots that are into cocaine. So then it's them going there to try to find whoever it is that might be interested in this stuff. Even though Dick Ritchie is a very low-level actor that probably doesn't know very many people, he's their in, so they have to try to find out who they can sell this cocaine to. Another subplot is obviously the mob that's now after Clarence and Alabama. Their cocaine's been stolen, their pimp is now dead, so now Clarence and Alabama have to try to navigate staying away from that crowd of people while also navigating selling this cocaine. Then there's a character called Elliot.
Elliot, do I look like a beautiful blonde with big tits and it tastes like French vanilla ice cream?
He is one of Dick Ritchie's actor friends who he believes has a connection to somebody who wants to buy the cocaine. So Elliot works as a personal assistant to a director, a hotshot Hollywood director named Lee Donowitz. And so Elliot, being an assistant and also a friend of Dick believes that this is the best option they have for selling it. So one thing that Clarence does to sort of entice Lee Donowitz is have Elliot bring a sample of the cocaine to Lee. So Elliot has this cocaine. He is on the way to bring it over to Lee. He's got a girl in there. They're doing a lot of cocaine. And then he is speeding, gets pulled over by the police. He wants to put it in her purse and she doesn't let him. And then cocaine goes flying everywhere. He is then forced into sort of a police investigation. Now the act 2, all those subplots, they set up for the last act, what I'll call the meetup. The meetup was between Lee and Clarence, so that Clarence can sell his cocaine to Lee. Obviously all of it was set up by Elliot and Dick Ritchie, and so they meet together. And again, this is sort of all sequences that are caused by the scenes before them. Clarence found a whole suitcase of cocaine, but he has nobody to sell it to. Therefore, he must find someone to sell it to, and that's his old buddy Dick. But Dick isn't big into acting, so he has to find someone else to actually buy it. So it's all scenes that play into each other, and there's not one that doesn't fit, which makes True Romance a great movie. So looking at like the last meetup in Butts and Therefores, so Clarence goes to Lee Donowitz's place, but Elliot has a wire on him while they are going there. And then the movie ends in a Tarantino fashion where there's 4 groups of people in sort of a standoff. And that's what I like about Tarantino. And this is the same for every writer as well. What a writer needs to do is find out what they like and utilize that to the best of their ability. So one thing that I always notice in Tarantino movies is standoffs. He is a standoff master. So you have True Romance, where he does the 3-group standoff. Inglourious Basterds is my favorite movie. Kill Bill, Tarantino does it in almost every movie. One of his favorite movies is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which has the best 3-way standoff in the history of movies. What a writer does is take what they like and then input that into their own movie. He puts his own spin on it, so he doesn't do the exact same thing as what Sergio Leone did, but he puts his own little spin on it, puts it in his own movies. We can see the evidence of that in every single movie that he makes, and that's what a writer does. They take things they like, they plug it into their own stories to make it their own. Very similar to the term steal like an artist. Stealing is taking something somebody else did and making it better when it comes to art and putting your own spin on it. Whereas bad writers borrow. So they just take whatever they liked and then put that in their own movie without putting their own spin on it. Great artists steal, bad artists borrow. This is his first movie, directed by Tony Scott. I think Tony Scott did a great job. So when you take a look at how different artists write their movies, write their books, whatever it is, Tarantino especially loves using his personal life just like any other artist would. His time as a video clerk, and sort of did a little twist on that, made Clarence a comic book store cashier, utilized both the romance and the crime genre, utilized subplots, and then used one of his favorite movies as the inspiration for the ending, and then ending the movie as quickly as possible after that. So once the climax happens, then you have to bring all the strings together, and we see Clarence in Alabama on a beach, and that is how Tarantino wrote True Romance.